There is a moment in every life when silence becomes heavier than consequence, a moment when telling the truth no longer feels brave but necessary. This is not the kind of truth that shouts, it does not accuse, it simply stands, calm, unbending, and awake. And yet, in some families, that quiet honesty is treated like a disturbance, as if clarity itself were dangerous. Not because it harms, but because it reveals, because it refuses to participate in carefully preserved illusions. Families like to call it unity. They like to call it respect. But often, it is nothing more than an agreement to remain comfortable, to not question, to not remember too clearly, to not speak too honestly. And the one who does, who chooses truth over harmony, quickly learns that honesty has a price, not shouted at, not openly rejected, but slowly corrected, subtly dismissed, gently reminded that peace is more important than reality. This is not a story about rebellion. It is a story about awareness, about the quiet strength it takes to remain truthful when the cost is distance, misunderstanding, or emotional exile. Because when honesty enters a room built on silence, it does not knock, it exposes, and those who benefit from the darkness will always call the light the problem. Tonight, this is not about blame, it is about recognition, about understanding why the most honest voice in the family is often the most uncomfortable presence, and why that discomfort is not a flaw but a signal. When truth becomes a threat, there is a painful misunderstanding in many families about what honesty actually does. Truth is often accused of breaking bonds, creating distance, or changing people. But truth does none of these things. Truth does not damage healthy structures, it only exposes fragile ones. When honesty is welcomed, it strengthens connection. When it is punished, it reveals that the connection was never built on openness to begin with. In families where silence is rewarded and questions are quietly discouraged, the person who speaks honestly is not seen as sincere, they are seen as dangerous. Not because they attack, but because they disrupt the comfort of unexamined routines. In such environments, harmony is mistaken for health. Smiles are maintained, traditions are repeated, and difficult realities are carefully avoided. Everyone learns what can be said and what must remain unsaid. Over time, this becomes a system, smooth on the surface, tense underneath. When one person steps outside this system and speaks plainly, the reaction is rarely immediate confrontation. It is subtle, a pause, a shift in tone, a gentle reminder to let things go. The message is clear without being spoken. Truth is welcome only when it does not challenge the existing order. The threat of honesty is not in its words, but in its consequences. Once something is named, it can no longer be ignored. Once a pattern is acknowledged, it can no longer hide behind tradition or time. This is why honesty feels unsafe to those who rely on denial. It demands responsibility, reflection, and change. And change, even when necessary, feels like loss to those who benefit from things remaining exactly as they are. So instead of addressing the truth, families often redirect their discomfort toward the person who spoke it. This is where the honest individual begins to feel the quiet punishment. They are labeled too sensitive, too serious, or creating problems, not with harsh words, but with repeated dismissal. Their intentions are questioned. Their tone is analyzed more than their message. Over time, the conversation shifts away from what was said to how it was said, effectively erasing the truth itself. This is not accidental. It is a defense mechanism designed to protect the family's emotional equilibrium, even if that equilibrium is built on avoidance. What makes this dynamic especially painful is that the honest person is often deeply invested in the family. They speak not to harm, but to heal. They notice what others ignore. They feel what others suppress. Their honesty is not impulsive. It is considered, measured, and often delayed until silence becomes unbearable. Yet when they finally speak, they are met not with curiosity, but resistance. The family reacts as though honesty were an act of disloyalty, as though clarity were a betrayal of belonging. Over time, the honest person learns a difficult lesson. Truth has a hierarchy in some families. Certain voices are allowed to speak freely, while others are expected to absorb and adapt. Honesty is permitted from those in positions of authority, but questioned when it comes from those who challenge that authority. This imbalance creates an unspoken rule: be truthful, but only in ways that do not disrupt the emotional comfort of others. Anything beyond that is treated as unnecessary, dramatic, or disruptive. The real cost of this dynamic is not conflict, but self-doubt. When honesty is consistently met with resistance, the truth teller begins to question their own perception. They wonder if they are overthinking, exaggerating, or misunderstanding. This internal conflict is far more damaging than open disagreement. It slowly teaches the individual to censor themselves, to soften their awareness, to second-guess what they know to be true. And in doing so, the family avoids change at the expense of one person's clarity. Yet honesty does not disappear. Suppressed truth does not dissolve, it waits. It shows up in distance, in emotional withdrawal, in the slow fading of connection. The honest person may speak less, but they see more. They may withdraw, not out of resentment, but out of self-preservation. Because when truth is treated as a threat, silence becomes the only safe refuge. Understanding this is not about assigning blame. It is about recognizing patterns. Families that punish honesty are not always cruel. They are often afraid. Afraid of disruption, afraid of accountability, afraid of facing what they have learned to avoid. And the honest one becomes the mirror they do not wish to look into. Not because the mirror lies, but because it reflects too clearly. This keynote is a reminder of one essential truth. Honesty does not break families. Fear of truth does. And when honesty is treated as a threat, it is not the truth that needs to change, but the system that cannot survive without silence. The silent contract of obedience. In many families, obedience is never openly demanded, yet it is constantly expected. There is no written rule, no formal declaration, but everyone understands the terms. Belonging is granted to those who adapt, agree, and remain predictable. This unspoken arrangement becomes the foundation of family life, quietly shaping behavior, conversations, and emotional expression. It is not enforced through force, but through expectation. And the moment someone begins to question it, the cost becomes visible. This silent contract is often disguised as respect. Children are taught early that harmony matters more than honesty, that questioning elders is inappropriate, and that peace is maintained by compliance. Over time, these lessons do not disappear. They mature. They become emotional reflexes. Even as adults, individuals may feel a subtle tension when expressing an opinion that differs from the family's narrative. Not fear in the dramatic sense, but discomfort, the sense that honesty might disturb something fragile. What makes this contract powerful is its invisibility. No one admits it exists. If challenged, the family will insist that everyone is free to speak, free to be themselves. And yet, patterns tell a different story. Certain topics are avoided. Certain truths are tolerated only when spoken by specific people. Certain emotions are welcomed, while others are quietly redirected. The rules are never explained, but they are strictly observed. When someone breaks this contract by expressing a boundary, naming a pattern, or refusing to play their assigned role, the reaction is rarely explosive. It is controlled. Conversations become shorter. Warmth becomes conditional. The individual is met with confusion rather than curiosity, as though their honesty has violated something sacred. The message is subtle but consistent. Your clarity is inconvenient. This is where obedience reveals its true function. It is not about values, it is about predictability. Obedience keeps roles intact. It ensures that authority remains unquestioned and that emotional comfort is preserved. The family does not fear disagreement. It fears instability, and honesty, by its nature, introduces the possibility of change. That possibility feels threatening to systems built on repetition. The honest individual begins to notice how approval is distributed. Agreement is rewarded with inclusion. Silence is praised as maturity. Compliance is interpreted as love. Meanwhile, honesty is met with patience that feels thin, support that feels temporary, and acceptance that feels fragile. Slowly, the person realizes that love in this system is not unconditional. It is negotiated. This realization is deeply unsettling. It forces a painful question. Am I valued for who I am or for how well I perform my role? In families governed by silent obedience, roles matter more than authenticity. The caretaker must always be understanding. The peacemaker must never confront. The responsible one must never falter. And the moment someone steps outside their role, the system reacts, not with reflection, but correction. The pressure to return to obedience often comes wrapped in concern. You've changed. You're overthinking. Why can't things be like they used to be? These statements are not meant to harm. They are meant to restore balance. But balance achieved through suppression is not balance, it is avoidance. And each attempt to pull the honest person back into compliance reinforces the silent contract. Over time, the honest individual faces a difficult choice: continue obeying and remain connected, or speak honestly and risk emotional distance. This is not a dramatic decision made once, but a quiet negotiation repeated daily. What to say, what to soften, what to withhold. The cost of obedience is internal erosion, the slow fading of self-trust. Breaking this contract does not require confrontation. Sometimes it happens through clarity alone, through choosing not to explain excessively, through refusing to apologize for awareness, through understanding that respect does not mean self-erasure. When obedience is mistaken for love, honesty becomes an act of self-respect. This keynote is not an attack on family values. It is an invitation to examine them. True connection does not require obedience, it requires presence. And any bond that demands silence in exchange for belonging is not protecting unity, it is protecting fear, gaslighting the honest one. There is a quiet form of confusion that settles into the mind when honesty is consistently questioned. It does not arrive suddenly or violently. It arrives politely, wrapped in calm voices and reasonable explanations. This is the moment when the honest person begins to realize that the greatest challenge is no longer speaking the truth, but holding on to it. Because when reality is repeatedly reinterpreted by those closest to you, certainty becomes fragile. In families that punish honesty, truth is rarely denied outright. Instead, it is reframed. Events are remembered differently, words are softened, intentions redefined, meanings adjusted. That's not what happened. You misunderstood. You're remembering it wrong. Each statement seems harmless on its own. Together, they form a pattern that slowly destabilizes confidence. The honest person is not accused of lying. They are encouraged to doubt their own perception. What makes this dynamic especially powerful is its collective nature. When one person questions your experience, you may resist. When several people do it calmly, repeatedly, and with apparent unity, resistance becomes exhausting. The honest individual begins to wonder if clarity is arrogance, if memory is unreliable, if awareness is exaggeration. This is not because they lack intelligence, but because humans are wired to trust familiar voices. This process does not require intention to be effective. Families often engage in this pattern unconsciously, motivated by a desire to protect themselves from discomfort. Admitting the truth would mean revisiting painful moments, acknowledging mistakes, or disrupting long-standing narratives. So instead of facing reality, the family reshapes it, not aggressively, but consistently, and consistency is persuasive. The honest person begins to notice how their emotional reactions are scrutinized more than the events that caused them. Their tone is questioned. Their timing is criticized. Their feelings are labeled as excessive. Meanwhile, the original issue fades into the background. The conversation shifts from what happened to why you feel this way. This redirection is subtle but effective. It places the burden of proof on the person who spoke up rather than on the truth itself. Over time, this leads to internal fragmentation. The honest individual may hold two realities at once: what they experienced and what they are told they experienced. This tension creates anxiety, hesitation, and self-monitoring. They may replay conversations repeatedly, searching for flaws in their own understanding. They may begin to document events mentally just to reassure themselves that they are not imagining things. Clarity becomes something to defend rather than something to live in. One of the most painful consequences of this pattern is emotional isolation. The honest person learns that sharing openly leads to confusion rather than connection, so they begin to withhold. Not because they have nothing to say, but because explaining feels futile. When reality is negotiable, communication loses its grounding. Silence becomes safer than clarity. And yet, the truth has a way of asserting itself. Even when doubted, it leaves traces. It shows up in the body, in tension, fatigue, unease. It shows up in behavior, in withdrawal, distance, and guardedness. These are not signs of weakness, they are signs of a mind protecting itself from distortion. Breaking free from this dynamic does not require proving anything. The need to convince others often strengthens the pattern. Instead, it begins with quiet self-trust, with acknowledging what you know without seeking validation, with understanding that disagreement does not equal misunderstanding, and that being told you are wrong does not automatically make it so. This keynote is about reclaiming internal authority, about recognizing that clarity does not require consensus. When honesty is met with distortion, the most powerful response is steadiness. Not louder words, but firmer grounding. Because when you stop arguing with altered versions of reality, truth regains its weight. Gaslighting thrives on confusion. Honesty survives on awareness, and awareness, once reclaimed, is not easily taken away. Why integrity is always isolated first. There is a recurring pattern in families that struggle with honesty. The person who holds the clearest sense of integrity often stands alone, not because they seek separation and not because they lack love, but because integrity refuses to blend into comfort-driven agreements. It does not shout, it does not demand, it simply remains consistent. And in systems built on emotional convenience, consistency becomes unsettling. Integrity is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It appears in small choices. What you refuse to ignore, what you will not excuse, what you choose not to participate in. These quiet decisions slowly distinguish one person from the rest. While others adapt to maintain smoothness, the person with integrity remains aligned with what they know to be true. That alignment creates distance long before any physical separation occurs. Families often interpret this distance incorrectly. They assume it is pride, withdrawal, or lack of care. But in reality, it is restraint. The honest individual senses that full participation would require self-betrayal. So they begin to step back, not in anger, but in awareness. This withdrawal is rarely explained because explaining would only invite correction. Instead, the space grows quietly. What makes integrity isolating is that it cannot be negotiated. Compromise is possible when values are flexible. Integrity, however, draws a line, not to punish others but to protect the self. And lines make people uncomfortable. They reveal contrast. They highlight differences that were previously blurred. In families that depend on sameness, difference feels like rejection. This is why integrity is often framed as detachment. You think you're better. You've changed. You're distant. These statements are not observations. They are reactions. They attempt to pull the person back into emotional proximity by questioning their motive. But integrity is not a claim of superiority. It is a commitment to coherence between thought, word, and action. As integrity holds, isolation increases. Invitations become fewer. Conversations become surface level. The individual is included, but not engaged, present, but not trusted with depth. This is not punishment in an obvious sense. It is exclusion through subtlety. And because it is subtle, it is easy to doubt. The honest person may wonder if they are imagining the distance, if they are over-interpreting small shifts, but the pattern remains. The family may not even recognize what they are doing. They simply feel more comfortable around those who mirror them. Integrity, by contrast, reflects reality without distortion. It does not accuse, but it does not comply. That neutrality can feel cold to those who expect emotional alignment as proof of loyalty. The most difficult part of this isolation is the temptation to soften integrity in exchange for closeness, to overlook what you see, to say less, to agree more. This temptation is human. Belonging is a powerful need, but every time integrity is compromised for acceptance, the cost is internal. The relationship may feel smoother, but the self feels divided. Choosing integrity does not mean choosing loneliness forever. It means accepting a temporary solitude in exchange for long-term clarity. It means understanding that not all distance is loss. Some distance is necessary to see clearly, and some relationships cannot meet you at your level of awareness without first confronting themselves. This keynote is not about rejecting family. It is about recognizing that integrity changes dynamics. When one person stops participating in emotional shortcuts, the system reacts. Isolation becomes the price of alignment. But alignment, once established, becomes a source of quiet strength. Integrity may isolate you at first, but it also protects you from being lost in environments that require self-erasure. And in time, that protection becomes more valuable than proximity ever was. Choosing inner peace over family approval, there comes a point when the pursuit of approval becomes more exhausting than the pain of letting it go. This realization does not arrive dramatically. It arrives slowly, through repeated moments of self-silencing, emotional negotiation, and quiet disappointment. The honest person begins to understand that no amount of explanation will earn acceptance in a system that requires compliance. And in that understanding, a new priority emerges: inner peace. Family approval carries a unique weight. It is tied to history, memory, and identity. Wanting it is natural, but when approval is conditional, granted only when you remain agreeable, quiet, or emotionally convenient, it stops being affirming and starts becoming controlling. The individual may continue trying to earn it long after it has become clear that authenticity and approval cannot coexist in the same space. Choosing inner peace does not mean rejecting family. It means redefining your relationship with expectation. It means no longer measuring your worth by reactions, silence, or emotional temperature in the room. This shift is internal before it is external. Nothing may change on the surface at first. You may still attend gatherings, you may still speak respectfully, but internally something settles. You stop waiting for permission to be yourself. This choice often feels uncomfortable at the beginning. Guilt may arise, not because you have done something wrong, but because you have stepped outside a familiar role. When you stop seeking approval, others may sense the change, even if they cannot name it. You are calmer, less reactive, less eager to explain, and this calm can be unsettling to those who relied on your emotional availability as proof of loyalty. Inner peace is not indifference, it is discernment. It is knowing when to speak and when silence is an act of self-respect. It is understanding that not every misunderstanding needs correction and not every assumption requires defense. This restraint is often misunderstood as distance, but it is actually grounding. As peace becomes a priority, emotional boundaries form naturally. You share less with those who consistently reinterpret your words. You engage selectively. You stop offering vulnerability where it has not been met with care. This is not withdrawal, it is alignment. You are choosing environments that do not require constant self-monitoring. One of the most liberating aspects of this shift is the release of outcome dependence. You no longer shape your truth around how it will be received. You accept that some people may never understand you, not because you failed to explain, but because understanding would require them to change, and that change is not yours to manage. Choosing peace also brings clarity about responsibility. You begin to see that emotional comfort in the family has often been maintained by your flexibility. When you step back from that role, the imbalance becomes visible. Others may feel unsettled, but discomfort is not harm. Growth often feels disruptive before it feels stable. This keynote is about dignity, about choosing calm over chaos, self-trust over validation, and clarity over confusion. Inner peace is not something you demand from others, it is something you cultivate by no longer abandoning yourself. Family approval may come and go, it may shift or remain withheld, but inner peace, once chosen, becomes a steady presence. And in that steadiness, you discover a truth more powerful than acceptance. You no longer need permission to be whole.